One of the biggest talking points this year has been the new budget restrictions. But another issue that's popped up has been the idea of capping driver salaries too. So what did Sebastian Vettel propose the teams can do to make a change? Plus, what did George Russell say was so surprising about his time at Williams? And why are McLaren holding back on their car's developments? Stay tuned because all of that and more is coming right up. First up, money, money, money. Currently, the salaries of drivers and the top 3 members of staff are not included in a team's budget cap, but some have suggested that to get on top of spending, there should be a limit on how much the drivers earn too. This year, Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton will both earn more than $40 million a year as their base salary, while the lowest earner on the grid, Yuki Tsunoda, still takes home a cool $750,000. Many of the big teams have run into trouble trying to stay within their budget this year, and this has reignited a debate about whether there should be a limit to drivers' earnings. As you can expect, this hasn't gone down well with the drivers. Reigning world champion Max Verstappen thinks that as the sport is growing, the drivers should be rewarded just like the company is. He said, "It's completely wrong because I think at the moment, F1 is becoming more and more popular and everyone is making more and more money. So why would the drivers be capped?" And he's not the only one who has voiced his opposition. 4-time world champion Sebastian Vettel suggested that it is suspicious that just when F1 teams are starting to turn real profits, debates about driver salaries have come up. With a spending cap, it means that each team is making more profit than they did when there were fewer restrictions. But Vettel has a wholesome alternative for teams to consider. He proposed teams should be capped in terms of having certain fixed earnings, and everything beyond that should, go to a certain pool to do great things with it and have a positive impact. It's a sweet idea from Vettel, but it's hard to imagine many teams agreeing to it. And now McLaren's mission. This year's budget cap has already been a big factor in the season. Now they are holding back McLaren from improving their car. When Mick Schumacher crashed his Haas during qualifying at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, the team decided to withdraw from the race. That's because a full rebuild would threaten to take them over the budget cap by the end of the year. And now McLaren are facing a similar problem. Team principal Andrea Seidel said, "Hopefully it's not just us who had to pull the handbrake in terms of further developments due to the restrictions we're having mainly from the cost cap side. McLaren have had to hold back on developments that they were hoping would build on their momentum right now. The first race of the year was disastrous for the team, with both their drivers finishing outside the points. Since then, they have recovered strongly, and Lando Norris even managed a podium finish at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. But they also know how tricky this season is. With new regulations and constant upgrades coming from all teams, the pecking order is changing from race to race. At this point, they're sitting in 4th in the Constructors' Championship, just ahead of Alpine. There's still a significant gap between the top 3 teams, Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes, but that was expected. Their objective has been to be the best of the rest in the midfield, but when Lando signed his 3-year extension earlier this year, he was probably hoping to be closer to the front. And now, going green, their place in the championship isn't the only thing on the mind of McLaren's Zach Brown. He's also interested in which direction the sport is heading in and said that it could be sooner rather than later for an all-electric series. Formula One has already set some big goals for itself in terms of sustainability. By 2030, the goal is to reach net zero carbon. That means 100% sustainable fuel and getting rid of single-use plastics. The sport is partnering with Aramco to develop a sustainable fuel that will be introduced in 2026. Formula One cars this year are already using 10% ethanol fuel, which is part of the project. McLaren CEO Zach Brown wouldn't rule out the possibility of a completely electric-powered Formula One in the future. He said that there are also alternatives to electric-powered engines, like hydrogen, sustainable fuels, and hybrids. McLaren are interested because they're entering Formula E for the first time this year. They just unveiled their first car and are setting their sights on the title. They are taking over the Mercedes team, who are the reigning world champions. Back in Formula One, they're trying to hunt Mercedes down for 3rd place in the Constructors' Championship. And if they can get things under control and continue some of the consistency they've had, McLaren could be fighting for podiums again. At least, that's what Lando Norris thinks. He said, "I have a lot of faith in the team I have, since everything was refreshed and restarted with different people looking after it." The young Brit is contracted until the end of 2025 and says that he has no regrets about his decision. But if McLaren continue to struggle, he might be digging into the fine print. Next, getting low. Over at McLaren's longtime partner Mercedes, they're also looking for a comeback, and the only way for them to do that is through more upgrades. After the Spanish Grand Prix, team principal Toto Wolff said that they finally understood how to solve their porpoising issue, and at the Canadian Grand Prix, they showed excellent race pace, with Lewis Hamilton finishing on the podium. But the teams weren't the only ones gathering data that weekend. The FIA used the Grand Prix to collect information that will help it enforce its new technical directive. That directive means that if a car has too much vertical oscillation, then the FIA will instruct the team to raise the car's height. There are plenty more upgrades in the pipeline to fix the rest of their problems too. Mercedes have been running one of the lowest setups of any team for years. years, which has left them with a much stiffer car. Now, with the problem of mechanical bouncing, they're feeling the consequences of riding too low, but steady improvement has made Toto Wolff optimistic about the future of the team. After the Canadian Grand Prix, he said, "A lot of work is needed to get to the front, but we have a clearer direction now. We're focused on finding more and more performance as the season progresses." One thing the Australian boss has had to smile about is George Russell's performance this year. The youngster has ticked every box for the team and has already collected 3 podiums. Plus, he's significantly ahead of his veteran teammate, who just happens to be a 7-time world champion. Now, Williams' recovery. Seeing Williams at the bottom of the standings is no surprise to anyone anymore. Before George Russell's magic second place in Belgium last year, their last podium was in 2017. Russell was with the team for 3 years while waiting to be promoted to the Mercedes team, but he has said in a recent interview that things didn't quite go according to plan. Mercedes actually thought that Williams could be on the verge of bouncing back to a competitive position. On the Beyond the Grid podcast, Russell said, "When we signed with Williams back in 2018, we thought this was a team at the time that could bounce back from this. So we all agreed that 3 years was a good period." But the young Brit admits that by the end of 3 years, it felt like far too long. He felt that he was ready to move up and fight for race wins, but the car he was given just wasn't capable. Looking back though, he thinks that everything happened at the right time. He said, "I think joining Mercedes last year or even in 2020 would have been incredibly tough. Going up against Lewis, when that car has been evolved to suit his style of driving." Russell thinks that going up against Hamilton in a car with the old specs would have been too tall a task, and he's probably right. Now he thinks that it's a fresh start and a good opportunity to write his own chapter. And so far this year, he's certainly done that. Do you think that Russell was promoted to Mercedes too late? Or did he need time to prepare for a top team? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.